beautiful continent of Africa is blessed with an abundance of natural resources, raw materials, precious metals, and fertile soil. Africa comprises 54 countries with over 1.3 billion people, producing $2.2 trillion dollars in nominal GDP. The largest drivers of the economy are agriculture, natural resources, and trade. In 2013, it was the fastest growing continent and remains a powerhouse of resources, ideas, and innovations. With consistent growth and improvement, it is estimated that the African economy will reach a GDP of $29 trillion dollars by the year 2050, playing a major role in the global economy. The World Bank expects most of the countries of this continent to reach middle income status with a GDP per capita of at least $1,000 within the next decade. Here, we discuss the 10 wealthiest countries in Africa in 2022 and the nature of their economies. Number 10. Ghana, with a GDP just shy of $74 billion dollars over the last year, found in West Africa, has an economy that is both diverse and rich in resources. The country was the first in sub-Saharan Africa to break free from colonial rule, as well as the first to achieve the target of halving extreme poverty. The nation has attracted foreign investment due to its overall positive business environment, experienced economic growth of just over 6% in the last 2 years. Services contribute to around 50% of the Ghanaian GDP and employ almost 30% of the workforce. Industry is the next biggest contributor to GDP at just under 25%, followed by agriculture. Ghana has an abundance of natural resources helping to fuel an economic boom. Gold is the country's main export. This is followed by petroleum, and together they make up to 50% of the country's foreign exchange. Other major exports include cocoa, beans, timber, and gold. Number 9. Tanzania, with GDP of $77.51 billion dollars. With a GDP of over $75 billion dollars, Tanzania just makes the list of wealthiest countries on the African continent, coming to a number 9. Known as the home of some of the country's most famous national parks, and of course, Kilimanjaro, the country comprises of lower middle mixed income economy. The country's economy is largely based on agriculture, contributing almost 25% to GDP and employing half of the workforce. Industries are a growing component of the economy, which accounts to almost 30% of GDP and includes mining, manufacturing, construction, electricity, natural gas, and a water supply. The main exports include gold, coffee, cashew nut, and cotton. Tanzania has achieved a relatively high economic growth in recent years with a 5.6% growth rate, but these does seem to be slowing down. The medium-term economic outlook is positive, supported by large infrastructure spending, with real GDP projected to grow 5.8% in 2022 as a result of the reopening of trade corridors and improved tourism sector for performance. However, despite economic growth and the poverty rate having decreased in the past years, the absolute number of people living in poverty has remained the same. Number 8. Ethiopia, with a GDP of $105.32 billion dollars. Found in the Horn of Africa, the landlocked country of Ethiopia, split by the Great Rift Valley, is the 8th richest country in Africa, with archaeologically findings dating back over 3 million years. This ancient land is found from being the place where the coffee beans first originated. The nation is the highest coffee and honey producer in Africa, making up a large portion of the country's foreign exchange. Other exports include legume, oilseeds and curd flowers. The GDP of more than $100 billion comprising agriculture, construction, manufacturing, tourism, food processing, resources, and energy. Agriculture is the region's most promising resource, making up to 40% of GDP, 60% of exports, and more than 80% of total employment. Ethiopia's economic growth has averaged 9.9% year on year for 10 years since 2008. This stable annual growth, something that very few Africans have managed, has begun to attract foreign investment. In 2018, the government launched an ambitious economic reform to open up the economy even further and spearhead transformation. The country's poverty level fell by 31% by 2015, and it intends to be a middle income economy by 2025. However, higher consumer inflation, socio-political instability, and an underdeveloped private sector are issues to keep an eye on. Number 7. Kenya, with GDP of $114.68 billion. Kenya, a country in East Africa well known for its vast landscape and wildlife, is next on Africa's richest country list, having a GDP of over $100 billion. This nation, with a stable living condition and established coffee and tea sector and rapidly growing agricultural sector, is the wealthiest in Southeast and Central Africa. Historically, its coastline has been home to a number of strategic ports for Asian and Arabian traders for centuries, becoming a trade hub for the region. The Kenyan economy is not built around the oil sector like so many other countries in the list, but still experiences diverse positive growth. The Kenyan nation has emerged as one of the fastest growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa, growing GDP by 5.7% in 2019. This is as a result of positive investor confidence, a stable political climate and service sectors, a good macroeconomic environment, and a clear business agenda. The industrial sector contributes almost 50% of the GDP. The agricultural sector contributes 35% of the GDP, with the main products being coffee, tea, and maize. Fast growth was also experienced in tourism, financial services, and technology industries, while petroleum comprises a significant part of its foreign exchange. Number 6. Angola, with GDP of $124.86 billion. The country of Angola has one of the biggest reserves of raw materials in Africa, especially it could be the highest on the list of African richest nations. However, due to resource mismanagement and internal corruption, the economy of the country has been negatively affected. With a GDP of over $124 billion, it comes in at number 6 on the list. Angola's economy is built on oil, with large reserves of natural gas and oil making up over one-third of its GDP. The production and export of crude oil contribute significantly to foreign exchange. In fact, 90% of the nation's revenue in the export sector comes from the sale of crude oil. Other noteworthy exports include diamond and cargo ships. Agriculture is also expected to become an important sector for the economy going forward. The civil war in Angola ended in 2002. Since then, positive steps have been taken, striving towards economic advancement and stability. There has been work on both political and structural reforms alongside the IMF and the World Bank. Since then, the country has experienced one of the fastest growing economies in the world and become one of the richest African countries. Number 5. Morocco, with GDP of $133.06 billion. With a GDP of over $130 billion, Morocco comes in at number 5 on the list of the richest countries in Africa. The economy of this country in North Africa is versatile and stable, experiencing growth in a number of industries over the last decade. It is the second richest non-oil producing African country. The country's economy is driven by mining and manufacturing. 30% of Morocco's GDP comes from industry, 15% from agriculture, and 55% from services. This is supplemented by a growing tourism sector, with locals being welcoming of tourists and the government placing a strong emphasis on attracting visitors to the country that is well known for its attractions. Morocco relies heavily on its agriculture and is the third largest producer of phosphorus in the world. The country has benefited greatly from its diversified exports, non-limited to electrical equipment, vehicles, and vehicle parts. Additionally, the telecom and textile industries bring a lot to the economy. However, Morocco has experienced stunted economic growth owing to internal problems, with real GDP growth of only 2.7% in 2019, missing the World Bank's estimate of 2.9%. Number 4. Algeria, with GDP of $193.6 billion. Dollars. The largest country on the continent found in the north, Algeria, comes in at fourth place on the list of wealthiest countries in Africa, boasting a significant economy and available infrastructure and a GDP of over $190 billion. Dollars. The country achieved a notable achievement of reducing poverty by 20% within the last 20 years. Crude oil reserves are abundant in the developing Saharan country, and the economy is heavily reliant on it, so much so that hydrocarbons make up almost 70% of the income of the country. A recent discovery of more crude oil reserves have boosted this rapidly growing industrial country. Other sectors that make up Algerian economy include agriculture, industrial works, commercial service, and construction. The country is also one of the largest suppliers of ammonia in Africa. However, it is worth noting that the recent depression and instability of oil prices have resulted to a decline in the country's currency reserves. In addition, political uncertainty and scandals in the hydrocarbon industry have caused a dip in Algeria's economic growth. Number 3. South Africa, with GDP of $426.16 billion. Dollars. This southernmost country in Africa is another significant player on the continent as the third richest African country. With a highly developed economy, advanced infrastructure, and a GDP of over $400 billion, dollars, the country is considered one of the fastest developing countries in the world. Often referred to as the Rainbow Nation, South Africa is one of the only countries on this list that is not reliant on a single source of revenue. The country has a good mix of mining, manufacturing, financial services, and tourism. It is also abundant in natural resources and raw material exports, the likes of gold, diamond, platinum, coal, and iron ore. It is one of the world's largest exporters of these commodities, particularly gold and platinum. The country is world renowned as a major tourist destination and places a lot of emphasis on tourism as part of its economy. However, political and global turmoil have hindered its ability to meet its full potential. The country was faced with a recession after experiencing consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth rates, and development has slowed, growing its GDP by only 0.2% in 2019, 1.1% in 2020, and 1.8% in 2021. South Africa also has the highest rate of inequality in the world. Number 2. Egypt, with GDP of $435.62 billion. Dollars. The ancient land in northern Africa held the spot of the richest country in Africa for many years. However, the economy suffered severely and foreign exchange reserves tumbled following the 2011 revolution during the Arab uprising. With the most recent GDP of more than $400 billion, dollars, Egypt now holds the second spot on this rich Africa list. Economic activities have improved and stabilized over the last decade to experience positive economic growth. The government recently concluded an economic reform program alongside the IMF aimed at reforming and bolstering the economy. Real GDP growth reached 1.6% in 2019, up from 5.3% in 2018. The country has also seen unemployment level fall, an improvement in foreign exchange reserves, higher exports of goods and services, and a bolstered tourism sector, all contributing to its development. The leading factor of the Egyptian economy includes petroleum and natural gas export, tourism, wholesale and retail trade, construction and real estate. The state has diversified its economy away from just raw material exports in recent years, and over half of the GDP now comes from services based employment. However, Egypt could face some socio-economic issues due to a large percent of people living below the poverty line, unemployment, a weak healthcare system, and global slowdown. Number 1. Nigeria, the richest country in Africa, with GDP of $510.58 billion. The West African country, with a population of over 200 million citizens, make up an essential part of Africa's economy. With a GDP of over $510 billion, Nigeria holds the position of the richest country in Africa. The sizable GDP is mainly driven by finance, transport, infrastructure, tourism, and an abundance of crude oil. The country records around 1.6 million barrels of oil a day according to OPEC, making it the largest exporter of crude oil in Africa. These petroleum exports make up 10% of the total GDP and over 80% of the export sector revenue. In addition to petroleum, Nigeria has an abundance of raw materials and natural resources contributing the region's wealth. These include coal, limestone, zinc, lead, tin, natural gas, niobium, and iron ore. There is also significant fertile land for agriculture, which is responsible for over 20% of the GDP, producing cocoa and rubber. The large population have helped to propel Nigeria as the largest consumer retailer in Africa, and the digitally aware residents have contributed to the country's fast-growing tech sector. According to the World Bank, Nigeria's GDP grew 7% year on year between 2000 and 2014, one of the fastest rates in Africa. This has slowed to 2% in recent years due to political instability, socioeconomic factors, and oil and production shocks. The country has placed a strong emphasis on protecting its natural resources, trying to move away from its large reliance on oil refineries and processing plants. Known for its vibrant cultural heritage, different ethnicities, natural splendor, and large population, Nigeria remains the number one producer in terms of GDP output on the continent and Africa's wealthiest country. Preview.